Hi, I'm Dr. Garry Palmer of Sportstest. This time I'd like to talk to you about whether we should be looking for using heart rate and or power in terms of helping us out with our training. This is a question I get asked quite a lot, and particularly now as power meters are becoming far more prevalent than they were many years back. Lots of athletes have decided to start using them. When I say athletes, obviously I'm specifically talking about cyclists and triathletes as opposed to, clearly to runners. Well, why should I have a heart rate monitor? Oh, quite simply, the pros do. This is a photo I took on a training camp back in Spain in 2011, where Radio Shack were training just down the road from us. And as you can see quite clearly here, the athlete in the photo has a polar heart rate monitor on his wrist, and he has an SRM power meter attached to his handlebars that will be picking up data from a crank-based system. So just because everybody's got a power system and because the pros use them, does that mean I need one? The question is, if everyone's got one, are they actually using it properly? Really what we should be thinking about is thinking about training harder. Now, should we think about training harder? Really, the monitor is about allowing us to ride smarter and not necessarily harder. So you actually get more value from your training by putting the same amount of volume in, the same number of hours in, or you get more value from your training by actually putting less hours in, but actually by making sure your training is much more focused. So the key value of heart rate monitor or a power meter is first of all ensuring a sufficient training load. Are you training at the right load? Are you training at the right intensity for you? What's your training session doing through the duration of the training session? Are you going off too hard? Are you going off too easily? Is your performance dying as you're training? So it really gives us feedback as to the time spent on the road. Are you actually working? Are you working at the intensity that you need to be? Are you wasting your time? Now the next value of having a monitor is actually the feedback during the performance itself. So again, in something like a triathlon, something like a time trial, something like a sportive ride, am I going off too hard? Again, people find that their concentration lapses slightly during performance, so it's sometimes a kick. Am I improving? Do I need to keep pushing? Do I need to back off? So that feedback mechanism during your performance can be really helpful. So yes, a heart rate monitor or a power meter is not necessarily essential, but very valuable to you. For me though, the key value of a heart rate monitor and power meter is as an early warning system. And what we find, we can use that early warning system for a number of different factors. So the first factor really would be illness. And what we will typically find is for a given intensity, for a given power output, during illness, your heart rate will often be elevated. Now that's not always the case, but that's a sign that we'll often see. Is a rider will go out for a specific speed, a specific power output, and we will see an elevated heart rate. That's a sign that the body isn't happy. With overtraining, we generally will see the opposite of that. So if an athlete has been overtraining, and hopefully you will have seen my overtraining presentation, if you look back through my blog articles, you'll certainly find it. With overtraining, what we tend to find is the heart rate will be suppressed and the athlete will struggle to elevate their heart rate. On longer rides, hydration status can also play a bearing. So what we find is that as an athlete isn't drinking enough and gets dehydrated, the heart rate will start elevating for a given speed, for a given power output. And with nutritional status, if an athlete isn't eating enough, what will happen is either the heart rate will stay the same but the power will drop, or the heart rate will stay the same but the speed will drop, or actually the speed and the heart rate will drop because they just can't generate the power. So though that heart rate monitor and power meter can be used really usefully to give us an early warning system. So there's certainly a lot of value for having a heart rate monitor and or a power meter. It isn't just something that you follow in the crowd. However, as we know, not every road is a smooth road, and there are problems. There are problems associated with both systems. Your heart rate responses specifically are affected by the heat. So on a hot day, when you're getting dehydrated, your heart rates will elevate. As you shunt more blood to the skin to help you cool, you will see a higher heart rate for the same effort. Similarly with dehydration, as you get dehydrated, you will also see your heart rates often elevate in order to try and deliver the blood to where you need. Adrenaline can play an absolute nightmare. So as you're sat on the start line of an event where you'd expect your heart rate to maybe 60 or 80 in a resting situation, you might look down at your watch and you're not doing anything, but the heart rate's up at 140 because the adrenaline is making the heart pound away. So again, in that situation, a heart rate really isn't going to be much use to you. Again, a heart rate response, as we mentioned before, with overtraining can be affected by fatigue. The crucial problem with heart rate, though, is it doesn't give us an instantaneous response to the workload, the stress that you're putting through your body. There is a time lag. So if you've got a short hill, you can get out the saddle and you can bounce over the hill and be on the way down again before the heart rate's even responded. So using your heart rate to give you a true indication of the workload that you're doing at that specific time isn't necessarily very, very valuable. But if you're aware of all of these factors, it can be really useful, because your heart rate is a good indicator of whole body metabolic stress. So it's how hard your body is working for that time period. So really what we're looking at is you're looking to use your heart rate to smooth out what's going on over a time period. So as long as you're riding sensibly, your heart rate can be really useful. There are also issues with power use. So functional threshold power, which is used by a lot of people to determine training zones, might not necessarily occur at the point of metabolic threshold. Again, go back and check our blog on metabolic testing and what your metabolic profile tells you. Therefore, the calculated training zones may be inaccurate. The other problem we get is athletes may not re-establish their training zones frequently enough. And obviously, if you don't re-establish your training zones frequently enough, you're training at the wrong intensity. Whereas heart rate isn't as transient as power outputs. Your power zones also don't highlight the fatigue and the illness that we mentioned earlier with using heart rate. So if you're using power only, you're looking for a specific number. You're looking to hit your FTP number. You're looking to hit 85% of your FTP. And you'll often overlook the heart rate, or you'll often overlook fatigue. So often we see people that are training exclusively on power and not looking at heart rate. We often see that leads to earlier onset of overtraining. So in my view, which is best? Well, heart rate is usually adequate for training if you train sensibly and if you're aware of the pitfalls, but it's often misleading for racing. Power, on the other hand, provides a very objective marker for events which require pacing, so time trialling, triathlons, climbing or solo efforts, so sportive riding. But is often too static if it's used alone in training unless it's measured repeatedly, or more importantly, used in a combination with heart rate where you actually look at your heart rate. In terms of racing, which is best? Well, it's event dependent. Time trials, sportives and triathlons, your power is beneficial, especially in pacing climbs or longer races. Heart rate is okay if used in caution. If it's a factor of actually saying, well, I can afford a heart rate monitor, but I can't afford a power meter, use your heart rate monitor, use your heart rate monitor wisely. You don't necessarily need to go the whole hog for power, but power, if you can afford it, will give you an additional level. With road racing, where you road race according to what's going on in the race, you race on feel. You have to respond to the race as opposed to responding to your power meter or heart rate meter. If you're in a break, or if you're in a trying to close down a break, or you're working by yourself, yes, you can use power, yes, you can use heart rate, but really you're responding to what's going on around you. So overall, we should be looking to train smarter, not harder, and use a combination, if possible, of heart rate and power. But as I say, if finances or availability restrict, your heart rate will give you sufficient information if it's used wisely and sensibly. Thank you for listening. Hope you found this blog article really useful for you, and I hope you can contact Sportstest, because there's a lot more that we can do with you, specifically determining your metabolic profile and setting up training plans for you. Thanks very much.